Welcome to the Demystifying Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What the world of private equity?
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it.
Programming language. Why should we care? What is a typical development stack inside of a portfolio company? The MacLaurin Group looks at development stacks and discusses why the choice is so important.
Good afternoon. We are back for another episode of Demystifying Technology, and I am joined by two fellow MacLaurins. I don't know what the plural for MacLaurin is. MacLaurins. Ryan and Marcus. Today we're going to talk about something that we've been tossing around the office for quite a wee bit, which is languages. Does it actually really matter which languages we go for?
Nah.
And frameworks. That opens up a whole new can of worms there. Our discussion today is going to be looking at what is a typical stack inside a portfolio company, how varied should that stack be, and how much importance should we put in something that could change quickly or goes through various styles and vogue in terms of what's in and out on the stuff. So Ryan, you, a bit like myself, are from the Java camp. What say ye?
Well, I think this is one of those things that it's important to give a little bit of thought towards in terms of what you're moving towards, and there's a number of factors that we can discuss as we move through it, but obviously one of the big factors is what resources do you have in-house. A lot of times it's going to impact which languages you choose, and it's not even necessarily what resources you have in-house, but what resources do you have in your area. I mean, if you're sitting in a market where there's not a whole lot of Java developers, then you may not want to choose Java just because it's not going to be economical for you to find talent. And there's a number of other factors that go into it. But
that's a good point. So Marcus, we discussed this a while ago as well. How do you know what your local area is?
Well, you have a few tricks you can pull on there. I mean, looking at Monster, looking at what the local schools are teaching, they all try to look at, well, the schools always try to look at, what are our students going to need 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The further you go, the more of a guessing game it is. But it gives you a pretty good starting point for what can I find and what am I about to find on the job market.
Yeah, and usually we sometimes have the anchor store in the region, as it were. Who's the big player in the region that's bringing together all the sort of stuff. Particularly smaller companies are sometimes like the fish flying around the big oil tanker hoping to pick up some scrapes, as it were. It's the big names that bring stuff in. And they generally have their flag on a specific language or a framework.
Yeah, I mean, if Google comes to town, they're going to bring a lot of that stuff with them, right?
So with respect to languages, then, what are the sort of the big ones today that you wouldn't get fired for deciding that was going to be my stack?
Well, I mean, obviously Java is going to be a good one. As much as I hate to admit it, PHP is pretty big around the world at the moment. Like, it powers a lot of websites. There's plenty of people that's doing that. The big one that we see rising up at the moment, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, which is Python. Schools are trying to use that a lot for teaching. Probably wouldn't be using that for anything heavy, but obviously it does have its place.
Yeah, I think Python has been used in places where, and I'm going to be completely corrected here, I'm sure, where small, sharp scripting type sort of stuff, you wouldn't necessarily build a whole enterprise in Python, but where I need to do some...
Yeah.
And I see it in like ETL type sort of applications where I need to transform some data or load some data or do a little bit of scripting in and around sort of like
the Lambda side of the fence. I see a little bit of it popping up for like DevOps side of the fence in terms of just that, like, I just got to script something out. So
that is starting to change a bit though. There's more and more powerful tools in Python being released and used for your full stack development, just like you would in JavaScript or Java.
And speaking of JavaScript, obviously Node.js and the Java is going to be...
Well, that was suspiciously absent from your list there. I mean,
I'm biased.
I mean, you're choosing PHP and Python over JavaScript?
No,
really?
it's just a case of... I'm trying to think of the ones that are sitting... So one of the ones that I tend to keep an eye out on is the... what do you call it? The TIOB index. Tobe.
Yes.
There we go.
I think the I is silent.
Yeah. It always confuses me. And so you have those generally, if you're sitting somewhere probably on the top 10 of that list, you're sitting pretty good. All those tend to be very high traffic languages. You're going to find plenty of stuff out there, not only in terms of developers, but just resources for your developers. Because development nowadays, because there's such a fluid market, a lot of it is, can you kind of go out there and find knowledge? Are you trotting down new territory? Are you the one blazing the trail through the woods? Then while that obviously is a bit alluring from a pioneer standpoint, from a company and building up on it, I want to be able to Google and find stuff about my language.
And that reminds me of a story a long time ago when I was. Remember SWT, which was IBM's version of Swing, whereby in Java you actually had rich components that was done to the OS. I definitely was one of the few that was trying to play with this outside of Eclipse, and I remember trying to get a specific thing to work, and I was quite pleased with myself. So I wrote a blog entry, blah 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 blah, went all forward. Fast forward a few months, and I hit another problem, and I started googling more SWT stuff. My own article kept coming back to me as a solution. I'm thinking, no, this community is way too small.
Where does the subject matter expert go to talk?
Yes. And this was pre-Stack Overflow, so it truly was, blogs, mail forums were your big sort of bastions of
channels.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's an excellent point, though. I mean, for your developers, for your shop, you want there to be lots of materials to pull on, tutorials, guides, Stack Overflow. Let's never forget Stack Overflow. If your guys can't go anywhere to go find all the stuff they need to learn,
you better have
blazing a path, but
yeah, you better have the subject matter experts in the field in your office, which means you're also probably paying a premium for them.
Yep.
Yes, and particularly for portfolio companies of our size that we deal with, you don't need to be on the leading edge here. You've got enough problems ahead of you without having to figure out a new language or a new framework.
No.
So on that front, then, what is the sweet spot when it comes to the amount of languages that one should profess to have inside an organization?
we're starting to head into religious war territory now. This is fun.
It is, because we'll talk about frameworks in a minute, because a language does not mean you're ready to go at that point. So what's our sweet spot here? What do we think is a good number?
So for me, I think it depends obviously on your company and what you're doing. Like if you're a company that's doing almost solely front end, then I would probably limit myself to 1 or 2, because there's plenty of front end languages out there. If you're doing front end and back end, again, you can still limit yourself to 1 to 2, but that's where definitely I could start seeing 2 or 3 entering in. For me, it's kind of, you got different areas of business, and so for each one of those strong areas of business in terms of a use case, 1 to 2 kind of tops. And generally, if you're going into 2 for, like, for example, front end, I would expect there to be 2 for a good reason, or you're in the case of like you're transitioning. So maybe you have a little bit of legacy code and you've decided, okay, we want to move from CFML over to Node.js. So yes, we still have some CFML sitting around, but we're moving to Node.js. But I wouldn't be trying to play with in the front end world of, well, there's so much out there, let's try 5 different things. Maybe for prototyping, but that's pretty much it. My stack is going to be built on 1 or 2 technologies for that area.
And that's a good point. So when we talk about looking at new technologies, before we even get to frameworks, there are so much happening, and Google themselves have introduced a number of languages regarding like Flutter, Dart,
They have, yeah.
Go, etc. When should a company fully entertain taking on board a brand spanking new language?
Your average company who are not trying to be leading edge, just if you're going for that, go for it. 6 months out, just run with it. But for your normal, regular company, I would say you want at least 5 to 8 years of industry use before you start even looking at it.
I would say, though, if you're one of those companies that's looking to be bleeding edge, what's some of those pitfalls that you're going to run into trying to stay bleeding edge? Like, if you're doing that every 6 months, what do you see being the problems?
Well, the core problem is expertise, really. If your guys don't have more than 6 month experience in just about anything, it simply takes time and experience to become an expert at something. You have to bang your head against that wall so many times,
Right.
learn so many things.
And I think a language can also evolve beyond what it started out life as.
Take JavaScript.
Or even Java itself. Like, Java 11 now is a shadow of what Java 1 or even Java 2, 3, 4 up to when we started getting sort of closures and what have you. Java as a language has evolved so much over its time.
Yeah, and I feel like the one thing that I always fear with languages that haven't been around for, I would say, more than 2 years is it going to survive? Because I feel like, especially when we're talking in the front-end space, which is obviously that's why I stay more in the Java, because I'm more back-end. But when you're talking the front-end space, it's that cult of personality almost in terms of this is the hot new thing. And so many people flock to it for that first few months that it's out because, oh yeah, it makes maybe this 1 or 2 things easier. But then it fades away because there's another hot thing that shows up. And so it's kind of like constantly chasing that. And then when you look 2 years from now, while yes, it's very rare for a language to completely die and go away to where you're never going to see it again, the community around it just shrinks to almost nothing, where you might as well consider it dead from at least a company perspective of trying to support it and keep things going. Because you basically are kind of back what we were talking about originally. You almost kind of become the subject matter experts because you're one of the few people still using it.
And from a company's perspective, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're on a supported platform, because 9 times out of 10, well, I would say 99 times out of 100 for our portfolio companies, technology is not their business. Technology is merely a function to which their business can run. So they want to be able to have a platform to which is getting updated security updates, updated feature updates, something that's getting performance tuned as hardware and as cloud, etc., starts to become the norm. That language has got to evolve with the ecosystem to which it is playing within. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. So that's languages. Now, the true Pepsi versus Coke argument comes, and we'll talk about tabs versus spaces in a minute. Mark has brought one up about semicolons, but I mean, he's just poking the bear at that point in time. Frameworks.
Love them and hate them.
I tell you, there's silence there. What do we think of frameworks?
So,
Where to start?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a broad question, and just in terms of every language has, like, take for example Node. I'd say Node, when you start talking about frameworks, you got the kind of very small ones up to full Goliath. Java's in kind of the same boat. Frameworks to me are one of those things that I programmed for so long, so I'm very biased. Like, I considered myself a true Java coder, where I didn't really code in frameworks for the longest time. I like to do everything plain. That being said, with the pace of things nowadays, there's a lot more frameworks sitting out there that are lighter weight. Like, the big one in Java, of course, that everybody hears is Spring. I personally don't like Spring too much. I think it's a little too big of a framework, and you find yourself, you're building Spring frameworks, and that's all you can build from there forward. Like, once you kind of step into Spring and fully put yourself into Spring, it's kind of hard to get outside that ecosystem.
My problem with Spring is it's you're not a Java developer, you're an annotation developer. There's way too many more annotations than there is Java code, and that.
So when you start talking frameworks like that become kind of like all-encompassing, I personally don't really like those. I like more of the frameworks that are lighter weight, and just adding in more, make my life a little bit easier as a programmer. Like, give me some simplicity of functionality. Like, I don't need to know how to do it.
So your definition is really more utility versus framework. I would say like we would never call jQuery a framework, but it's a utility class.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tool set. It's not a complete framework like Angular or React. It's tools to build a thing. They're not the thing in itself.
So you bring a great point. So Angular and React, they are both based upon JavaScript.
Yep.
But the discipline to which one needs in either are not necessarily transportable.
No. If all of what you're doing is React, you are a React developer, just like you would be a Spring developer. Most of them tend to be very opinionated, how you do things, how you should do things, or how you have to do things. And of course you have the cult following in there too. It's giant flame wars of React versus Angular.
But is that a bad thing though? If you've got a development shop of largely inexperienced developers, or you are a portfolio company that doesn't necessarily have the engineering resources that are keeping an eye on things, for example. We rarely see, for example, code reviews and code quality tools in our clients. We always help them instill such things. So when we look at frameworks like that, is it a good thing or a bad thing that a company of that size, say, throws their hat into the React ring?
Yes.
It is a bad thing.
It's both a good and a bad thing. On the good side, you have, if everyone knows React, then everyone can sort of help out everywhere to a point. But it also means that anything you want to do that's outside of the framework, and this is true for all frameworks, you start to shoehorn your tool set into it because it's all you have.
Yeah.
So if you want to expand your business and your tools don't really align well, you're about to incur some cost. You need to retrain a whole bunch of people, or you need to hire new people, because the ones you have, they're experts on their one very specific area. So
the old adage, if all you know is a hammer, everything becomes a nail.
Yes,
can
absolutely.
Easily creep into this ecosystem in that respect. But surely from a framework perspective, having that set of rules and discipline to which your developers and your team has to follow, surely does that mean code quality is a little bit better? Or can you still go off the rails and still stay within the...
Well, you can 100% always go off the rails. I think it's one of those cases of it comes down to, you need that person or group of people inside of your organization that's kind of being the code Sherpas, let's call them, that are help guiding the rest of the developers in terms of what are the standards we're going to follow.
I'm going to steal code.
At that point, the benefit of going with one of these bigger and more mainstream frameworks is you generally are going to see where other large code organizations have already kind of blazed the trail for that. So to that degree, you can go and retrieve or use their coding standards, use their kind of stuff. This also means a lot of the tools like CenterCube are already kind of built and got checkers that can find and do that. Prime example being, I would say, generally if it's a big enough language and Google's used it, Google does a great job of releasing coding standards, and so it's very easy to go grab that. GitHub's another prominent one that likes to release coding standards. So generally, if you're in one of those bigger frameworks with a big enough community, there's some standards that you can go and adopt and then modify from there.
So basically, birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
If you start seeing some of the bigger boys starting to gravitate and starting to create what would you consider best practices and guidelines for said framework, then it's probably going to be sticking around a bit longer than you.
Oh yeah,
a new project on GitHub.
Right. It's a little bit like cheating too, like going after the things that say Google have built and used, because your shop may have 5, 10, 15, 20 people. Google has a lot more resources that they've thrown at just creating things like coding standards.
Yeah, though you got to kind of also take that side with a little bit of a grain of salt, because there's certain premises, especially when you start talking, take for example, Git strategies and that sort of stuff. A Git strategy for the likes of Google and some of that sort of stuff may not work very well for your team, or it brings a lot of extra hindrance to it that for your size organization doesn't make sense.
Oh yeah, you shouldn't just copy it and use it because Google did it, right?
Yeah.
No, I think we've seen before where some of the big practices that have been published, we see a lot of portfolio companies just get so confused and intimidated by it that they just stop using it altogether. And in many respects, let's just celebrate the fact that you're using version control, and if you're using at least one branch, then hey, yes, fantastic, we can build upon that. But don't feel like, and we've had a podcast about that before, don't feel like you're losing out if you're not being as purist and as fanciful as what that is. So from a framework perspective, then we're using the same rules, I guess, to evaluate a framework as we would a language.
For the most part, yeah.
We're looking to see what the community's like. We're looking to see how the evolution is like. So at what point in an evolution of a company's tech stack would it be okay for them to switch gears?
For me, I think it's going to usually be either something about the language is majorly shifted to where it's not working for you anymore, or it's just becoming a issue of keeping up with it. Prime example being take for example Java. If you were a Java 8 shop and you're still Java 8 and you're getting to the point where you're kind of realizing you're going to have to upgrade, and that's going to be a major effort. Anytime there's a major effort coming into play, I think that's a good time to stop and potentially evaluate, is there another tool or language out there where I can redo this better? Or if it's a brand new tool, piece of functionality that you got to add in. Every so often, I'd say every couple of years, get your code Sherpas, whoever it may be, your more senior people, should be kind of evaluating, is this project a good opportunity for us to maybe do a little bit of research and look around the ecosystem and see, is there something else we could bring in and use to make our lives
easier? I do like that aspect of things. I like to use prototype projects for like a test platform for new things, new frameworks, new languages, just new tool sets. Because it's a prototype. You know that this piece of code may not stick around because it turned out not good enough, or but we need it to be in this direction instead.
Yes, but you've got to be very careful of that, because you can get easily seduced into thinking that the prototype went awfully fast, awfully quickly in this brand spanking new language.
Oh, yes.
But a prototype is just purely that. It's just a prototype. We haven't actually gone into true business roles or any of the sort of stuff that we needed to do. And then we get ourselves all excited that this is the second coming, and holy crap, we can change things so quickly, we can do things so much faster,
This is why you don't let all your junior guys do this. You need some experienced people to lead those projects. It is very easy to get seduced by the shiny.
Oh, completely.
And I mean, if you follow the tutorials and guides, you will be up and running with any language in about 5 minutes, and oh my god, it is awesome. That's not the same as building an industry and an enterprise platform that's going to take you 2 years to develop. They're quite different.
So to sum up there, I guess, what we're saying is any new frameworks or languages should be more of a evolutionary decision-making process as opposed to a revolutionary process. Because in an evolutionary process, we're bringing everybody with us together. They're learning they're not learning new skills, but they're learning additional skills based on what they know already, versus switching the whole company from Java to Go. Or whatever the language is, doesn't really matter.
No, yeah. The only time I think those sort of, what I would almost call like a seismic shift ever makes sense is if you are more of kind of the startup where you may have written the platform, your initial platform, to get your funding and get something out there in one language. Because we see this sometimes with the smaller companies where it's okay, yeah, it needed to work. We needed to get something out there working. And now you're reaching maybe year 1 or 2 where you got some there, but you can tell already
there's not as many Ruby developers as you thought there was.
Right, exactly. Like it's just
Ruby too.
there's just not, or it's just not scaling properly. Like, and you're really thinking, okay, we know more now than we did when we first started out on this project. We fundamentally kind of need to do a rewrite for what's going to be our platform going into the future of actual stability. That's where I a lot of times see more of a seismic shift sort of opportunity coming along and say, okay, no. This didn't work. We're doing it in this new language because at that point, hopefully, you know more of your ecosystem and what's out there.
But that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. You have sort of a natural point at which it makes sense to consider it, to think about other alternatives, and really evaluate how did it go. Is this awesome, or maybe we should shift some?
Yeah, I would say the worst time to do this would be you're getting towards 0 hour and project hasn't been going great, and you just are deciding, okay, let's toss this into the ring because that's almost never going to work out.
Oh yeah, that's a Hail Mary move there.
Exactly, like you just, those sort of ones are almost always doomed to just add more failure to it. Like
you've seen an example on a website that looks suspiciously like the product you're trying to do, and you can see the source code from it saying, oh, if I could just modify that a little bit, and we've heard our horror stories there. Okay, so rounding up, Ryan. Spaces versus tabs.
I'm tabs 100%.
Oh, you're tabs 100%. Is that just to save the character count, or
especially because I've worked with so many people that have the mechanical keyboards, and you can tell when they're really hitting those spaces. That could just be a single tab. Like that's
make life easy for yourself.
Yeah.
Marcus, are you tabs or spaces?
Honestly, I don't care either or. Just keep it consistent because I have my IDE set up to show white space, and it drives me bonkers when there's just a mix of everything everywhere. That one's so much work.
Okay, right. Well, I confess I'm a tabs boy, to be frank with you, because spaces can get indenting a little bit hairy there. Okay, so and finally, semicolons in JavaScript.
Kill them off.
Really?
Yeah. It's great.
I just cannot look at code that doesn't have semicolons in it.
I agree. I didn't even think that was a real question there, coming from the Java backend. It's got to be semicolons.
Yeah, I still remember the days where I still put 10 space, print, 20 space, go to 10. That was a loop.
Yeah, I'm just trying to sit there. The Java compiler that's always running in my head's like, the code wouldn't compile without semicolons, so what are you doing?
Well, I the same thing without line numbers. I'm thinking, what is this label thing you speak of? I just don't understand how this works. Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. This was hugely entertaining. Well, it was for me. I can't speak to our listener. Please contact us one way or the other. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.